So we'll start off. We have Giancarlo Guerrero, music director, Nashville Symphony. Jonathan Leshnoff, composer. Live recording this weekend. The voice you're hearing is Justin Bradford. I'm the digital media manager and producer for the Nashville Symphony. And first of all, welcome back to Nashville. It's a very exciting time to be here, Jonathan.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. It's a wonderful orchestra, wonderful conductor, and I'm just so thrilled.
And I guess we'll start off. We had rehearsal this morning, first with the Violins of Hope as well. And this piece was written for this in mind as well. Just what are some of the emotions between both of you? Giancarlo, we'll start off with you. The emotions behind having these violins and their storied history and past to be here in Nashville.
Well, this is a very emotional project because these instruments, these violins, tell a story, and in some cases it's a very sad story, but nonetheless they were witnesses to history. And music being the universal language, in many cases these instruments provided hope for their owners, and in many cases probably brought them a little bit of joy. And today was the first rehearsal of this brand new piece that Jonathan wrote, and for me it's always exciting because, of course, going from the score to actually hearing it with the full orchestra is quite a special moment. And I know from the musician's point of view there was a sense of almost of great respect of what was happening, because we understand the history of these instruments, and the fact that before I started I even pointed and I asked the players who's playing one and show them, including one of our viola players. And everybody's treating this great project with great respect, and who better than Jonathan to write this great piece, almost showcasing these beautiful instruments. And already I can tell you there's lots of smiles on stage, from the sense that we know that this is a fantastic work and very worthy of what is happening this week.
And Jonathan, just the emotions behind it for you.
Yeah, it's I knew that this piece would be for the Violins of Hope, and as such I purposely wrote the second movement with very long passages for the strings, and just the strings in the beginning, and I add just a few percussion at the end, but I knew that focus would be there and the gravitas would be there, and so I oriented my writing towards that. To me personally, the Violins of the Hope and the theme of the piece that I wrote work very well together, because the piece that I wrote is an ancient mystical spiritual text. And on the surface you say, well, that's nice, I like to do that, but what does that have to do with Violins of Hope? Well, my answer is this, that I see the Violins of Hope as the physical continuation of my people, and the Jews and the others who were murdered ruthlessly in the Holocaust, 5 million others in addition to 6 million Jews. And the spiritual text is the spiritual continuity of the Jewish people. So I see this beyond just the wonderful orchestra and the performance. To me, this is a convergence. It's a convergence of my faith and the physical and the spiritual all into one.
And obviously this is a huge educational experience for the community to learn so much about this. So one of the questions that probably will be asked is, how do you pronounce the subtitle of your Symphony No. 4? Because people will want to know how to actually pronounce that.
There's a difference between Sephardic Jews who are from North Africa and Spain, modern Israelis, and Jews who've migrated into Eastern Europe. So Sephardic Jews would say Hechalot, but my forefathers from Russia and Eastern Europe would say Hechalos. It's the same word. Essentially the word means rooms. And it's based on a spiritual text where the author is giving instructions for the initiate to meditate themselves from one room to another until they eventually get with some divine communion.
Excellent. That's good to know. And Giancarlo, before we went live, you and Jonathan were discussing the piece as well. What's this process like when you're working with a composer who's here in person ahead of a live recording like this weekend?
I don't have to guess. If I have any questions, I just turn around and say, is this what you want? Sometimes when you play Beethoven or Schumann or Mahler, there's a little bit of educated guesses. I mean, you use all your training to come up with what was really in the composer's mind. But sometimes I feel it's a little bit more of a responsibility when the composer is there, because you have to give them the time for them also to make up their minds. I mean, and at times it's amazing that we can actually try things out, and we have the necessary rehearsal time to even try different options, where he might say, well, can you try it this other way? And fortunately, we have an orchestra in the Nashville Symphony that is so used to doing these types of projects with modern composers that they are not only willing but very professionally and disciplined. They are constantly raising their hands and saying, is this really what you want? Something doesn't sound quite right. So in many cases, they almost become almost like composers themselves, because when you write very densely, sometimes you miss the little details, and you need the musicians themselves to have a sense of ownership, that they are themselves also being creators of this. And I know for the composer, it's actually an immense help to have players that are so committed to this. And it is a work in progress. And remember, music is a living organism. Even after the performances and the recording this week, this is a work that will continue to be played for decades and if not centuries to come. And the music will continue growing. And at some point, maybe 100 years down the road, they'll say, what was Jonathan thinking here? Maybe there's something that might seem a bit ambiguous. And we'll be probably laughing from somewhere far away and say, we were there, we know exactly what he was thinking. And Nashville owns this piece, and that makes me immensely proud.
And Jonathan, especially, you mentioned it before, we'll dive a little deeper into it. Just how did you go about thinking to incorporate the Violins of Hope into this composition? And did these ideas come to you initially as a sound or concepts? And how did the ideas evolve as you're writing this piece?
To me, the Violins of Hope represent tenacity, in the sense that if the players died, were murdered, survived, whatever the situation, here they are. They're still here. It's like a remnant of a subsection of people who aren't here anymore, but it's still here. Mm-hmm. And so to me, the second movement of this, the second part of the symphony, which is very slow and drawn out, the lines are very present.
Yeah.
The lines are very there.
Yeah.
And it gives the conductor a lot of room to shape things and work with things.
And that's what we were talking about beforehand, that maybe I was seeing from it, again, being the first reading, from a very direct, precise, and Jonathan came to me and said, no, you might want to have some more room and breathe more and whatever feels right. And that's special when the composer gives you that level of freedom, then I can put my own stamp on it. And I do believe that the fact that these instruments are with us, I think, is a miracle. I mean, this when you think about also going back to the Stradivarius and instruments that go back 500 years, I mean, they're a miracle that they're with us. I mean, after everything that the world has gone through, and before we even had hard cases, and these instruments, we still have them. I mean, they're works of art, but in many cases they do tell a story. And the fact that we're able to play them, even more so, that they're not just sitting in some, museum. They're doing what they were intended to do, which is to make music and bring hope and happiness to people.
And I've been at Nashville, this is my third time here, and there's something special in the room. Mm-hmm. There's a special atmosphere on stage with the string players. When Giancarlo asked the string players, who's playing one? Mm-hmm. And they raised it up. Mm-hmm. Something special happened there.
Yeah, we do know that this is going to be a very emotional week, which is both good, but it can also be quite heavy, and we need to keep that always in mind. I finished the rehearsal just a little bit early because I felt that the air was becoming heavy. I mean, after a while it gets to you personally, and we need to make sure that we have the necessary state of mind to do our best, because it's music that just really touches your soul.
And going along with that, more broadly speaking, Jonathan, just how does your spiritual practice figure into your work as a composer, and how are you hoping to have this piece connect with the listeners of this weekend?
My take on spirituality is that it's a very personal thing. And not only is it a personal thing, but prayer is a personal activity. It's one-on-one. And so I'm not really into formality. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't established prayers in the Jewish tradition. Of course there are. But the idea is how they're approached. Are they approached, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or A, what does A mean to me? B. So for me, prayer is a more meditative experience. In fact, that's why I think so many of the prayers in Judaism are repeated again and again, because it's like a mantra. And to get someone's in the right place, suddenly they just have to repeat the same words. It's almost like warming up, or like doing scales. It kind of gets you there. So my approach, particularly to this piece, was to put each and every musician in that meditative space, because it's an experiment. But my thought was that if I could get everyone in their own world, in an orchestra, it's different than like real life. In real life, you have everyone in their own little office, in their own world, who knows who's connecting to who. But an orchestra, everyone doing their thing actually creates a greater whole. And so that's why the beginning of the second part of the symphony actually starts with a question. It's the full measure rest with the fermata. And no one plays, but everyone prepares. Mm-hmm. The measure says, who do you love? Who was it? Your family, friend, a teacher, this or that, right? And so the idea of that is so that the musicians just don't go right into the music, that they take a deep breath and get themselves set. So in this sense, this second part of the symphony, to me personally, is praying. It's a meditative exercise.
And Giancarlo, when you hear the composer speak like this about the piece, the obvious question is, does it help you in how you're conducting, and how does that help you when you're hearing the personal talk of a composer like that?
Well, more importantly, I asked them to come on stage and tell that to the players. I mean, I made the comment. He started laughing at me, but I said, "Listen, if we had the chance to have Beethoven come in and tell us what he was thinking, wouldn't we take that opportunity?" I mean, it's not any different now than it was 200 years ago. And as I said, a big part of this project that Nashville Symphony is so committed to modern music and living composers and giving them the voice of what it is that they want to say, I think it's absolutely imperative that who better than the composer come in and tell us what it is that was coming. And I remember when he started telling the same story with the question and how to set up emotionally for this piece, you could hear a pin drop in the hall. You could see the players really trying to make that connection and understand that this is just not a bunch of notes on a page. There is a deeper meaning to everything that we're doing. And at the end, I think there was nothing left to be said other than let's play the music. So for me, as I said, it's both exhilarating but also quite scary at times to have the composer, because you want to make sure that in the end it is his voice and that you're presenting everything in the way that he wants or she wants. And that's why the rehearsals are so important. We have to try things out faster, slower, louder, softer, brighter, darker. It's like watching the birth of a new being.
But I could attest that this composer is extremely satisfied.
Oh, good.
Thinks that everything's going great. So
that's so far, yeah. Listen, it never ceases to amaze me how incredibly prepared these musicians come to any rehearsals, but especially when it comes to modern music. They take it with the same level of attentiveness and love that they do the standard repertoire of Mozart or Beethoven.
Which is absolutely phenomenal. And Jonathan, you mentioned a little bit more, because part of this process is educating the audience as well what they should listen for in a piece. And you've gone into a little bit of detail about that, but a little even more detail. What would you like the audience to listen for as they are hearing your piece for the first time ever?
Well, fundamentally, my thing is that people shouldn't be listening for anything. Because my job as a composer is to take someone on a journey, right? Where they go, what they do, that's not...
It's like prayer, it's very personal.
It's very personal. Mm-hmm. I just have to be the conduit. So if one person may come to a happy place, another to an introspective place, wherever they go, that's who they are. But I just have to be the one who takes them there. So I don't like people listening for anything in terms of personally. If someone wants to be theoretical about a theory nerd, this or that, the piece starts out with these big crashing chords. Yum. Mm-hmm. And so that comes back several times in the first movement. But to me, it has a surprise and sudden entrance at the end of the symphony itself, with the entire symphony crashing on these chords. I wrote an optional organ part, which Maestro Giancarlo was so kind to accommodate. It doesn't have to be in the work, but there's an organ sitting in the hall.
Makes a big difference. Yeah, very climactic. So
at that moment, I bring the organ in on these chords, and to me, it's just... So in other words, if someone wants to listen for something, they could do that, but they don't have to.
So as we start to wrap this up now, Giancarlo, what does the involvement of Violins of Hope mean to you personally? Especially, it's not just the Nashville Symphony; it's a community-wide initiative. It's about equality and human rights, not just for one certain person or people, but for everyone, because the entire community has been involved in it, and it's something you've been very involved in as well. So personally, what does it mean to you for this to be in Nashville?
I think it's a perfect excuse to bring the community together around one particular idea, one particular goal, and it is a part of history that we're all familiar with. I personally have to tell you, one of the things that fascinate me the most, and people who've been attending my pre-concert lectures know that I adore history, but I've always had a particular affinity or a particular interest in World War II history. And I don't know really why, other than it amazes me to this day that humanity or humans can be capable of such horrors, and that somehow we don't learn the lessons. And in an era that where TV and images became available to be able to witness this thing, I mean, they're still shocking, beyond shocking, to see the levels of hatred and just destruction that was brought onto the entire world. And as I said when we started, these instruments, in many cases, these musical instruments, which are supposed to bring joy, became basically instruments of optimism for the people that maybe thought that things would not turn out to be so bad. Let's face it, that early on, especially in the Holocaust, I mean, nobody could have imagined that this could really be happening, and by the time we realized that, it was too late. And in many cases, these were the only possessions that these people brought with them. And it's relevant. Doesn't matter what time of history. I think even 1,000 years from now, we're going to be looking back at this moment in history and say how, why. And I don't think the question will ever be answered, because, I mean, this is nothing new. But the fact that in a place like Nashville in the 21st century, in the United States, in the world, we can still discuss this and have an open dialogue about it, but maybe bring music around it, bring a community, and create maybe a higher level of interest, I think it's a perfect excuse to bring all of us together as a community effort. And these concerts, of course, are just a part of it. It's just such a big project that we want everybody to be around, and we are very honored as a symphony to be part of this conversation.
And Jonathan, in closing for you, Violins of Hope, hope being that key word there, that hope is one of those words that means so much to just humankind, to mankind, to humans, and how we continue to prosper. I guess getting a little philosophical here, what does the word hope mean to you, and how you've prepared for this piece to be recorded and prepared to be here in Nashville? Just your thoughts on the word hope.
It's a very deep question. It would probably require another podcast if anyone really cares. All I could say is that this is definitely a highlight of my life, to be here and to work with these instruments and to work with this fine orchestra and Giancarlo in a piece that means so much to me, musically and personally.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, and everyone, thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks.